morning. Welcome to the convention. I'm Mike Strain. I'm managing editor of The World, and I'll be the moderator during our discussion today with Oklahoma's delegation. Thank all of you for being here. If you'd like to ask a question of the panel, please write that question on the cards at your table. Raise your hand, and John Denny Montgomery will be working the room. He'll bring cards up to me, and we can ask some questions. But before we start, I'd like to introduce everyone who's here today. We'll start closest to me, Senator James Lankford, Representative Tom Wood, Representative Tom Cole, Representative Mark Wayne Mullin, and Representative Steve Russell. And I'd like to invite everyone to start with an opening statement to begin our discussion today. And we'll just start closest to me and work our way down the table. Senator Lankford.
Great, good morning, everybody. Glad you're here. We do want to introduce a couple other special guests that are with me as well. My bride at 25 years, right there at the back, Cindy, is also here. If you get a chance to be around there. And then Mona Taylor, who's the state director for me, she's also right there as well. So it's nice to meet her. Let me just mention a couple things, and I'll save as much time as we can for questions as we go through it. There's quite a bit, obviously, happening right now in D.C., so let me hit just a couple of high points on it. The Senate now has the ball on healthcare. The House passed over a version of healthcare to us. I think the House did a very good job of trying to set this up and be able to work through the process. It is a real challenge of working with the Congressional Budget Office and the length, not the way they do the scoring, which is also a challenge at times, but the length of time it takes to do scoring. So if you're going to move something, CBO needs about 2.5 weeks to be able to look at it before you can move it on. Well, in DC time period, that's eternity as you work through the negotiations of a process. So we have it. We're not taking it up at all until we have a score. We now have the score, which we can all talk about the issues with scoring. My favorite comment is still 23 million people will lose health care insurance if we pass the House version. I had to smile when I saw that because we realized only 9 million people are actually on Obamacare. So it's difficult for 23 million people to lose it when only 9 million people have it. But the way CBO does their scoring is they anticipate there'll be another 14 million people that will get on in the future, and then all of those will lose it at some point. And the reason they say everyone will lose it is because the House didn't include a mandate that you have to buy it. And CBO believes if you don't force people to buy this product, no one will buy this product. Well, that's an interesting analogy to be able to put that in place. So the House has backed up and said, here's a different way to do it. The House was fully understanding. There was no grand shock that the Senate is not taking it up as is. They're removing the ball in this. We're taking it up as well. Let me set some things in context on this. I've had a lot of folks that have come and said this is all about attacking Obama's legacy. It absolutely is not about that at all. Our state had a 76% increase in healthcare rates last year. To put that in context for you, we all complain about the rising cost of higher education. Higher education costs have risen 76% in 15 years. Healthcare costs went up 76% in 1 year last year. This is a serious issue. The original goal of Obamacare was not a bad goal. It was to try to slow down the rate of growth on healthcare costs and to try to provide a better safety net for people at the bottom. That's not a bad goal. The problem is the execution of it. What Obamacare tried to do, it absolutely did not do. It did the opposite. 9 million people got insurance, many of those for the first time ever. 6.5 million people lost insurance. They used to have it, that now can't get it anymore. That doesn't help us. So basically say, well, great, we got an additional 9 million people, but we lost another whole group of folks as well that now can't afford it. There has to be a way to resolve it. So this is not about politics, this really is about people. And the preponderance of the conversations, and we in our conference have had a working lunch together every week for the last 4 weeks, day after day, that we sit down as a whole conference when we can all get together and to be able to work through healthcare issues. We now have a straw man issue. The primary conversations that are in our conference are how do we protect pre-existing conditions? How do we protect the safety net? How do we bring down costs for those individuals that are buying their insurance rather than on the subsidized insurance? What flexibility needs to go back to the state? As you know, Obamacare removed all the regulations from the states and removed all the regulatory authority of the federal government. How do we fix some of that so that states can have flexibility, knowing that the healthcare problems in Alaska are very different than the healthcare problems in Florida or Oklahoma. So we've got to be able to manage some of those things as well. That's the conversation. So I'll give you the outskirts here of timing as we work through it, knowing that every time we bring something up, it's 2.5 weeks before we get a score of CBO. So our hallelujah goal, for those of you that have done fundraising stuff before, is July the 4th. The only thing that's going to hold us back from that is CBO scoring. Because once we get a bill written and it takes 2.5 weeks, you can start doing the calendar count to figure out if we can actually get a score back in time to do it. And we will not vote in the Senate before there's a score because we're in the last round of this back and forth. We've got to have that. So we'll have that. In addition to that, any amendments that are made in the healthcare bill, we also have to have scored every one of those amendments. So you can imagine the length of time that we have just waiting on scoring time to be able to get that stuff back. So hallelujah goal, the 4th of July, by August 1 is the next goal to be able to have it done. I have been one of several pushing to say we do not leave in August until this is done. As you know, historically, the 1 month we're not in session in the year is August. But I really think we need to be able to get this done because there's a lot that needs to be done. And the healthcare providers, quite frankly, need time to be able to get the 2018 rates out. So that's a long answer on it. But I think that one's exceptionally important in what's really happening behind the scenes on it. You might have heard there was a hearing with the Senate Intelligence Committee this past week with Jim Comey. I know it didn't make much news. I appreciated all of the national media that called me and said, is everyone in Oklahoma talking about the Comey hearing? And I said, no, in Oklahoma, everyone's talking about Bob Stoops leaving. I said, so we have our priorities in order. At home, it's a little different. But the Comey hearing, there were a lot of surprises. I serve on that committee, as many of you know, through the question time through the Senate Intel work. Let me just give you a synopsis. I'll be glad to be able to field specific questions that you may have on it. The Comey hearing is not the culmination hearing. We've been on this for months. We have gone through more pages than I am tall to give you a reference of how many documents that we have gone through. We've gone through about 36 interviews, obviously the Comey hearing and interview being the most high profile of those. We've gone through about 36 already and we're not close to done. The three main questions we're trying to resolve is, did the Russians try to affect our election? There's absolutely no doubt they did. We're pursuing all the ways that they tried to do that because we've had national elections in 2018, in 2020, and on and on and on, and we've got to be able to push back on the Russians. The second part about that is we're trying to work through and resolve, did any American work with a foreign power to try to affect our elections, regardless of who that American is? Did any American try to work with a foreign power to affect our elections? The third aspect is the classified leaks. How are so many classified documents getting into the public arena? That is a serious issue to us. Just to be able to put it in context, it wasn't that long ago that there was a report from the New York Times reporting about how individuals that are some of our assets in China were suddenly disappearing a couple of years ago because there were leaks that were getting out on actions that were happening of our intelligence work in China. And so suddenly Chinese citizens were disappearing that were our assets, and many of them we have no idea where they are. This is life or death when you deal with a lot of issues about sources and methods. It's not just about ratings on a 24-hour news source. It is very important that we protect our intelligence operations. So those three things we'll continue to work through the process on. Quickly, there is a lot of work on budget reform, but I would say not enough on the way we do budgeting. It's not just that we do it, it's the way we do it, and the same thing on regulatory reform. We've moved quite a few regulatory reform bills out of committee, and we're working to be able to find some bipartisan consensus. There are areas of common ground there. We need to exploit those areas of common ground and move some things that we can move to be able to work through the process. So that's enough filibustering for me. Is that right, Pete?
That's why the word sent to the nursing homes in there. That said, though, I do have the greatest respect for the challenges the Senator has. For the coming months, in the fall, or perhaps in the next year, he'll have the highest profile responsibilities of any Oklahoman. And the things that they do in that effort have to be done correctly, fairly, because the results will determine the executive branch and where this country goes for decades to come. So Fortunately, we have a senator in the former Senator Lankford who's up to the challenge. That said, I know my colleagues and their experiences on approach and a variety of other committees. We'll talk about several topics too. Let me focus briefly on the things that fall within my 3 committees' jurisdictions, and we'll talk about what you care to. The 2014 Farm Bill. At the beginning of this session, because of challenges in the dairy areas, challenges in the cotton program, we'll talk about those later if you care to, there was discussion by my successor as chairman of the Ag Committee, Chairman Conway, that perhaps we should do the Farm Bill 1 year early. I agreed with it. There are issues that needed to be addressed. While 98% of the Farm Bill is working amazingly well in these price and demand issue situations, issues that need to be addressed. My chairman now leads the House side of the investigation of these very same issues. He will be consumed through the summer and the fall, indeed, this year too. So don't expect a new Farm Bill until regular order time in 2018. And perhaps because it's an even-numbered year, as I suggested to some of you at the time we passed the original Farm Bill in 2014, this one may be on the books for a while. It may be extended several times. Step over to the financial services side of the equation. We passed in the House this week what could generally be described as a repeal of the Dodd-Frank Act. The Choice Act, as Chairman Hensley referred to it, addressing perhaps the overreaction to the property boom, bubble, and bust of 08 and 09. The creation of the Consumer Financial So-Called Protection Agency, trying in our bill to get back to the middle, having gone from perhaps too far in one direction regulatorily to extremely too far in the other direction. This matters to the cost of and the availability of capital in the United States. The bill will now go to the Senate Banking Committee, and we will wait, like healthcare, for them to take action over there. This coming week, it appears we'll take up a bill to reauthorize federal flood. And while you might not think flood insurance matters in the 3rd District of Oklahoma, there are a lot of communities in the 3rd District of Oklahoma, and there's a huge number of communities in Oklahoma as a whole and around the country where this matters. If you don't have access to a flood product, you can't buy or sell your property. Some say, well, that means no new development in floodplains. Okay, but what about people who own property that they've spent a lifetime paying for, homes or whatever, in these areas, without reauthorization of this program? Yes, we'll make reforms. Without reauthorization, those very people will never be able to sell that property. They'll never be able to capture their life savings and finish up the rest of their lives. Science Committee. We've done a number of bills from reauthorizing NASA, the space programs, to a bill that Bridenstine and I put through that deals with modernizing how we collect data. In addition to the government satellites and the government sources, we'll be able to use private information too. Those of us who live in Oklahoma, as we all do, understand the critical importance of weather forecasting, both for economic issues and just day-to-day survival when something's coming over the hill. So great progress there. I would note, who is this guy, Bob Stoops, you're talking about? As an OSU graduate of 82? And from here, I'm going to the wheat field. Linda Lucas says it's time to plug.
Thank you very much. I want to talk about Congress overall for a minute and some of the things that it's been doing. And I want to begin by taking issue with the narrative in Washington, D.C., which is pretty common, that nothing is getting done. It's quite the opposite. In the House, and frankly in the Senate as well, this has been one of the most productive Congresses in the last 6 presidencies. There's been 150-odd bills moved through the House of Representatives. Over 40 of them are now signed into law. Some of the most significant are so-called Congressional Review Acts. We've never done more than one of those. We've done 14 now, which lets you go back and undo regulations in the last part of administration with a simple majority vote. We've done that, and that's really billions of dollars worth of regulations that were undone. As Frank and James both pointed out, from a House standpoint, we've pushed over health care across the line, and Dodd-Frank, 2 signature Republican promises. They're in the Senate now. That body, just by its nature, moves a little bit slower, and frankly, it's got a lot of other things to do, but they've got all the appointment to deal with, and my hat's off to them for the Gorsuch confirmation. We seem to forget that somehow happened 40 days ago or something like that. Taxes are already underway. And when I was home over Memorial Day weekend, just after we passed the House version of health care through, I was talking to a lot of my constituents, and they had no idea that we had passed $1 trillion spending bill. And I said, does anybody, I remember I was meeting with a joint group, I think in Chickasha, different civic clubs. I said, let me ask you guys here, we spend all our time on healthcare and taxes mostly. I said, do you know last week Congress passed a $1 trillion spending bill? That bill had the largest increase in military spending in over a decade. Not enough, but pretty substantial spend. Had the largest increase in border funding and security in a decade. Had the largest increase pay for our troops in 6 years. Actually, during the Obama years, we had a formula where every dollar you spent on defense, you had to match it with an increased dollar on domestic spending. We got out of that. And while this wasn't a presidential initiative, one of the great Republican initiatives in there, was staying within the budget caps. And James is part of this because he sits on what's called the Labor Age Subcommittee of Appropriations. Significant increases in National Institute for Health, Center for Disease Control. Frankly, things that affect everything. For a second year in a row, the largest increase in Alzheimer's funding. That's pretty significant if anybody here has dealt with the disease, obviously, but it's very significant fiscally. Most people don't know. We spend $259 billion a year to take care of Alzheimer's patients in Medicaid. $259 billion. And that will go to over $1 trillion by 2050. This is one of the top 10 killers, and we have no way to slow it down, let alone cure it. And as people live longer, it's going to destroy the federal budget. Nobody even knew that, but for 2 years in a row, we moved funding, in fact, the two biggest increases back to back to deal with this, and we moved from a little over $500 million to about $1.4 billion a year, and we will keep that ball moving up. So that was a pretty big deal. So Congress has actually been exceptionally productive. And most of it is largely unknown, I think, because we're sort of consumed by the crisis du jour. We're consumed by, obviously, the Russian investigation. And these things are all very important, but don't think that they've sort of stopped the day-to-day operation of Congress, because we simply haven't. Last point, we have, obviously, in front of us, we need to get the health care bill done. I hope we can do that. We need to have major tax reform to spark faster economic growth. Hope we can do that. But we also need to do the basics of just running the government. And we are behind schedule on appropriations because we delayed to give the new president an opportunity to offer some input on what we did. That'll probably be my focus for the next year, or the remainder of the year. The big thing is to get the bills done again. Probably going to see another omnibus as opposed to all the bills moving across the floor, because there's simply not enough time to do this. And again, when we got the last omnibus done, at least you think nothing can get done that's not partisan. That bill passed with a majority of Democratic votes in the House, a majority of Democratic votes in the Senate. Same thing, obviously, majority of Republicans in the House, majority of Republicans in the Senate, and Donald Trump signed it. So you really can get some big things done, but the big things, and when you deal with appropriations, just by definition has to be bipartisan. And at the end of this year, we'll either have another omnibus, because the rule of 60 in the Senate means you've got to have some Democratic support. And frankly, just to be honest, Republicans are not always very unified in the House, so they usually need Democratic support there as well. So it'll either be a bipartisan solution to funding the government for the next year, or we'll have what's called a continuing resolution, which is just flat funding. And the bad thing there is it throws sand in the gear. If you bought 100 tanks last year, whether you needed 100 this year, you still got to buy them. It's just a dumb way to run government. So hopefully we'll be able to do what we were able to do in late April on a bicameral and bipartisan basis and actually move the government forward. Now, you and my colleagues.
Thank you. And as you can see, we have the privilege of serving with a really good delegation. I think Oklahoma is blessed to have such a strong delegation, that all of us have our areas of expertise that we can all share and lean on each other, but we can also look at certain things that are important to us. And my great colleague and mentor Tom over here beside me has stole about half of what I was going to talk about. I'm going to hit some highlights and look at it from a different perspective too. We hear a lot about negative news, and to be honest with you, as you guys know, if it bleeds, it leads. and not the good things are being told. And I would love to tell all the good stories about what's happening, but from a business perspective, the last 4 years for me has been kind of tough, because it felt like all I was doing was spinning my wheels. You know, we didn't have agencies that wanted to work with us. We didn't have a White House that even cared what Congress had to say, and there was no movement moving forward. Now we have an administration that's working with us. We have agencies that are talking with us. And just kind of give you an idea, the House passed more legislation in the first 100 days than any time since the first George H. Bush was there. The President has signed more legislation into law in the first 100 days, by the way, rolling back regulations in the first 100 days more than any president since Truman. The President has rolled back more regulations, job-killing, industry-killing regulations, more than any president in history, not just in the first 100 days, in history. Now, granted, he had a lot more regulations to work with, but he was saving the industry billions and billions of dollars. In return, optimism in the economy is at the highest point that it's been in more than 2 decades. Border security crossing, illegal border security crossing, is down to a 16-year low. These are good things. As Tom talked about, a CRA. We hear a lot about a CRA, but what is a CRA? A CRA has only been enacted once since Clinton. What is it? It's when Congress says, hey, agencies, EPA, Department of Labor, Department of Energy, Department of Education, whatever it is, you step too far, we're going to have a CRA, and when we have a CRA and it's signed into law, not only does it roll back that regulation, but it tells the agency, you can never go back in and try to do this again. So it permanently puts them from being able to overstep the boundaries. It's happened once since Clinton. There's been 13 signed by this president today. 13. We've passed 14. We're waiting on the next one to be signed. For the first time since I've been in office, we have agencies that are working with us. You want to know how to get the economy moving? You know, the state has a little bit of a budget issue. We've heard a little bit about it, right? Federal government has a little bit of a budget issue. Best way to fix a budget is get the economy moving again. 75% of our economy here in Oklahoma is driven by small business owners. I'm one of them. Steve's one of them. The biggest problem we have in our businesses and our competitors is being able to comply with the mandates of the regulations. You want to get the economy moving again? Let the entrepreneurs go to work and quit having to face a faceless bureaucrat to be able to just simply be in business. 75% of our economy is driven by small businesses in Oklahoma. Over 50% of it is nationwide. 90% of every job created inside the United States comes from a small business owner. 90% of every job created inside the United States comes from a small business owner. We're the ones getting killed by the regulations. We have agencies that are working with us now. With the previous administration for the last years, you had agencies that wasn't interested in best business practices. They didn't care about the impact of the economy. It was more like they were raising funds by writing fines than they were actually working with you. We have agencies now on a daily basis reaching out and wanting to work with us. The atmosphere in Washington, D.C. has completely changed. I can honestly tell you I'm excited about being up there because we can actually make a difference. And we're making a difference regardless of what the national news is doing it. We're making a difference because the White House is engaged with us on a daily basis. It's rare that we don't see Trump or Pence at the Capitol on a weekly basis. Isn't that right? It's rare that I don't have a meeting with either Pence or Trump on a weekly basis. I guarantee you I speak to the White House every single day I'm in Washington, D.C. You know how many times I spoke with them in the previous 4 years? I can count them with no hand. 0. That's what happens when the White House is engaging with Congress. So regardless of what you hear, what I'm trying to tell you is that this country is moving in the right direction. And we move in the right direction by looking at the economy and getting Washington, D.C. and the bureaucrats out of our way and letting the entrepreneurs that built this country go to work. With that, I'll yield.
Well, good morning. It's good to be home. It's good to be with all of you. On Monday, we'll release out of our office Waste Watch number 7. So if people didn't hate me before, they will have 70 billion new reasons to hate us again. Here's some examples that you'll get a sneak preview on today. Harvard was awarded $3 million to study the effects of odor that asparagus has on urine. That's 288 Oklahomans that have to work all year to pay taxes for that ridiculous study. $5 million was awarded by the Department of Ag to have students dress up as fruit and vegetables to encourage people to eat healthy. 480 Oklahomans had to work all year long so people could dress up like Fruit of the Loom or something. 55.7 billion, we're not talking millions now, we're talking billion, in a little over 5.5 years awarded by the National Science Foundation in indirect costs. Now look, we all want research to go out and cure the common cold, cure Alzheimer's, cure cancer. We want all of those things. But did you know for every $1 million of grants that's awarded, the average university and institution will charge the federal government $520,000 in administration fee for that $1 million. You want to cure cancer? You're not going to do it like that. This has totaled $55 billion. Everywhere we go, every town hall, every time we get asked by the press, different things, we hear, why aren't you funding more? Why aren't you doing more? Why are you making these cuts? Because we're doing stupid stuff like this. Now, the good news is we have several bills that we're trying to put in. I was only able to cut $4 billion last year. But if every member of Congress would cut $2 billion, we would have no annual deficit, and we could start working from there. So stay tuned. It'll come out on Monday, and you'll shake your head just like me. But working together, we can knock down a few things at a time. Defense, let me speak to that a little bit. President Trump says he wants the world's greatest military. He's not going to get it on a $603 billion proposal by Mr. Mulvaney, who many of us have served with. Great guy, but he is more of a budget hawk to the exclusion of defending our country. The problem that you have is that we're not talking about some budget gain. We're talking about what we want to eliminate. Let me list them. The difference between $603 billion and $640 billion is we will no longer be able to maintain any kind of air superiority in Asia or Eastern Europe for NATO. Naval superiority will be the same problem because projections for modernization, contracting, ships, planes, all of that. We, in our military, as we see our country try to defend itself, we are using equipment that was done during the Reagan bump in defense. Every piece of equipment that we use for our nation's defense was done during the Reagan years. The F-35, which is coming in, everybody really likes that, and it's going to be fantastic and superior. Do you realize that the blueprints for that were laid down in 1991? I'm glad we're getting it done quickly. This is the type of thing that we have to recognize. And when we have this fight about domestic dollar-for-dollar match in defense, this is the cost. We're literally having to peel off museum parts to try to put aircraft in the air. We have over 70% of the Marine Corps' aircraft right now that cannot fly. We have about 50% of the other services. The Army's doing a little better on the rotary wing. These are real problems, so it's not a budget game saying, well, 603, 640, what's the deal? This is what we're talking about. It's still not maintained. Cyber defense, anybody think that that's important lately? These are all real things. Missile defense, we have that guy with the Jiffy Pop hairdo, Kim Jong-un in North Korea. He's not crazy. He's calculated, he's intelligent, and he will at some point miscalculate, and we could get in serious, serious trouble if we don't have good anti-missile defense. So when you hear all of the debates about defense dollars and why we need them and why we don't, keep that in mind. And I know our delegation is largely supportive of all of these things, to try to have a strong defense and looking for ways to do it, but it's not a budget gimmick. It really is about the readiness of our defense. And for me, having lived on the receiving end of that in a former life, I want to do everything that I can to make sure that if we're going to ask our men and women to defend the country, that they have the implements to do the job and also to save their lives. And with that, I yield back.